This is Closereads.
A philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. Hey all, it is time to start a new unit. We are getting off of existentialism for a while. We're going to do some John Stuart Mill. One of, I don't know, Wes, would you consider John Stuart Mill one of your favorite philosophers?
I could say On Liberty is one of my is one of the books that's most important to me.
Sure. And his take on utilitarianism, even, he's often even thought of as the founder of utilitarianism, though he is not, because his book was so good on it. And it solved a lot of the problems that Bentham brought up.
He's a great writer, which is not always the case with philosophers. So that's a nice thing about him.
So this we're going to look at this book, A System of Logic from 1843. And it is, I see my PDF has 674 pages. I had found, I think the thing that he's famous for is induction, right? Induction was introduced, I don't know who actually kind of came up with the idea. Certainly Hume made a big meal of it.
Well, Bacon, I think.
Okay.
Makes, makes science of it.
Okay. So the whole scientific revolution, that was we were no longer like Aristotle, perhaps trying to deductively figure out science from some sort of base assumptions, base observations about the world. We were going to come up with theories. We were going to look at regularities in nature, try to find laws. That's what induction's all about. I see a bunch of swans. They're all white. Maybe I can use induction to conclude that all swans are white, but that is going to be at least a preliminary theory until we dump it. So, until we see some black swans or enough black swans that we say, yeah, okay, they are not essentially white. There's nothing law-like about it. I just happen to have seen a subsection of swans that happen to be black, or black in that geographic area or whatever. So but supposedly Mill made this respectable. I don't know, because the whole point of an inductive argument is it's not actually valid. That a valid deductive argument is one where if the premises are true, that guarantees the truth of the conclusion. But for induction, no. Even the sun always rises. Well, you've seen it rise a bunch of times, and you can never actually conclude, this was Hume's big point, that it's always going to rise. So induction actually doesn't work at all. And Hume, I guess, is famous. We're going to see.
He's the first. Hume is the first to talk about the problem of induction, quote unquote, and that was in a treatise of human nature in 1739.
Yep. So within this book, it's book 3, chapters 8 through 10. So we will send out a link to this, the version that we're using. It's page 278 or PDF page 284. And the whole thing is on induction, but for some reason these chapters were one that at least some online syllabus that I pulled out focused on these. Chapter 8 is called Of the Four Methods of Experimental Inquiry. I guess before we get going, let's throw out, we'd love your nice rating and review on this podcast. Go to the Closereads Apple Podcast page, leave us a nice 5-star rating. It'll help people learn about it. We will, per usual, be posting the first, well, we don't know how many of these we're going to do. Maybe we'll hate it and we'll only do one, but if we proceed in our normal manner, then we'll probably have 2 public episodes and 1 or 2 behind the paywall episodes. If you want to get the latter, go to patreon.com/closereadsphilosophy. We figure if you're just a casual fan, if maybe you don't want 4 hours about this guy, maybe 2 hours is plenty. Thus is our theory that we're still serving the public and not merely teasing you I don't think 2 hours of material constitutes a tease. Any other introductory remarks?
Yep.
Let's get into it. Please
All
go.
right. Third canon. If two or more instances in which the
I think we're
phenomenon
not on the same page.
284.
Page 278, PDF 284,
Oh,
chapter 8.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Section 1. The simplest and most obvious modes of singling out from among the circumstances which precede or follow a phenomenon, those with which it is really connected by an invariable law, are two in number. One is by comparing together different instances in which the phenomenon occurs. The other is by comparing instances in which the phenomenon does occur with instances in other respects similar in which it does not. These two methods may be respectively denominated the method of agreement and the method of difference. In illustrating these methods, it will be necessary to bear in mind the twofold character of inquiries into the laws of phenomena, which may be either inquiries into the cause of a given effect or into the effects or properties of a given cause. We shall consider the methods in their application to either order of investigation, and shall draw our examples equally from both.
So let's stop there. So we had two little paragraphs there. Is the method of agreement correspond to looking for the effects of a cause, the causes of an effect, and the method of difference corresponds to the other one? Or are these just two different distinctions? Let's think.
Well, the comparing instances in which the phenomenon occurs is the method of agreement.
So we look at all the swans, or all the various birds. Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like that's just raw induction.
Yeah, and then looking at comparing instances in which the phenomenon does occur with instances in other respects similar in which it does not. So the black swan, I would say, method of difference, finding exceptions. That's my guess right now.
Or just swans versus, well, is it just swans that are black, or is it all birds that are black? Let's look at other birds. Or, that's not a very interesting one. If we want to, do birds lay eggs? I don't know. Look for other things is it just birds that lay eggs? Is it things that fly that lay eggs? I guess we want to compare this to.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll have to wait to find out.
And then, we're trying to discover the second paragraph, we're trying to discover cause and effect relations. So it says you could know the causes and be trying to find out the effects, or you could know the effects and try to find out the causes. Is that really induction? Like if it seems like you have to actually see both. You have to see the swans, and you have to see that they are black. You have to see, I mean, we're the examples that we've given so far are not even about separate events. It's about somebody having some kind of entity having a property. So, when I drop things, they fall. Well, is it always the case that when I drop things, they fall? What if I drop a feather? Well, it falls in some different way. So we want to see why they fall in different ways, even though the apparent cause, I mean, we always know some of the causal circumstances. If we see an effect, right, we know some of the state of the world. The sun rose yesterday. That's part of the state of the world. But we want to know the proximate cause. What makes the difference between the floating feather and the simply falling rock?
Mm-hmm.
Can we do it in a vacuum? Will it work the same, etc.? All right, this is, I know I'm being a little pedantic here, but we're just getting warmed up. We shall denote antecedents by the large letters of the alphabet, and the consequence corresponding to them by the small. Let capital A, then, be an agent or cause, and let the object of our inquiry be to ascertain what are the effects of this cause. If we can either find or produce the agent A in such varieties of circumstances that the different cases have no circumstances in common except A, then whatever effect,
Yeah.
then whatever
Sorry,
effect, yeah, and whatever effect we find to be produced in all our trials, it is indicated as the effect of A. Suppose, for example, that A is tried along with B and C, and that the effect is lowercase a, lowercase b, lowercase c. And suppose that A is next tried with D and E, but without B and C, and that the effect is lowercase a, lowercase d, and lowercase e. Then we may reason thus. Lowercase b and c are not effects of uppercase A, for they were not produced by it in the second experiment, nor are effects D and E, for they were not produced in the first. What is really the effect of A, the agent, must have been produced in both instances. Now this condition is fulfilled by no circumstance except lowercase a. The phenomenon lowercase a cannot have been the effect of B or C, causes B or C, since it was produced when they were not, nor of causes D or E, since it was produced where they were not. Therefore, it is the effect of A. This seems like it's actually not that difficult, but reading it aloud to you with not seeing the uppercases and the lower, I feel like maybe this was a bad choice already.
We'll find out. Yeah. Well, it looks like the A's and D's go away. The letters go away. So, well, no, they come back again. All right, we'll see. I mean, it'd be nice if he were using actual examples. But he's talking about causal over determinate. Well, yeah, he's talking about distinguishing causation and correlation, right? Some things are correlated, but it doesn't mean that they are necessarily causally implicated. So, in part, because they might be the correlated things might be, they might be randomly correlated, accidentally correlated, or they might be effects of themselves effects of another cause. What's a famous example of correlation without causation?
I mean, creatures with hearts and creatures with kidneys. That every one that has one has the other. Again, I'm not really talking about events. Yeah. I'm talking about properties, but it still works. That it's not that having a heart causes you to have a kidney. It's just that whatever causes both of them, it means they are always together. But typically, you want to say, we lowered taxes and the economy zoomed. Well, is it always the case? Is that a legitimate causal observation? Well, we have to actually try it in some different circumstances. We lowered taxes and this background effect were going on, and that allowed the economy to zoom. But maybe in some cases, lowering taxes just doesn't work.
Yep, that's a perfect example. So that's what, really this is, and again, this goes back to Bacon. We're talking about experimentation. We're talking about, ideally, we're talking about experimentation where we try to arrange things to see what the effect will be under different circumstances so that we can establish a true causal relation if there is one.
Yeah. All right. So that we're mixing up. What makes it a little difficult is just talking about the difference between a proximate cause and a background condition. That here it says we try these three things together. So one of them could be me moving my hand and dropping things, and then the other two could be conditions. Could be we are in a vacuum, we are on a high mountain. Something we are in space. But then we try and we see these three effects. Well, we try it without those things. We try it not in a vacuum, not on a mountain, and we see that, well, the thing still falls, but it doesn't do so in the way that it did with those two extra conditions. So we've shown that the dropping is related to the falling, but it's not related to the other things. And then you try it with some other correlated conditions, and you can try to narrow in on what effects are actually connected to what causes, which still doesn't rule out ultimately that you're going to find it's mere correlation, but it's stronger and stronger evidence.
Yeah. It looks like he is going to give us an example now.
All right.
For example, let the antecedent A be the contact of an alkaline substance and an oil. Okay, that's interesting. The combination being tried under several varieties of circumstances resembling each other and nothing else, The results agree in the production of a greasy and detersive or saponaceous substance,
Let's just
soap-like.
say greasy.
Basically, this is how you make soap, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay.
A greasy and detersive or saponaceous substance. It is therefore concluded that the combination of an oil and an alkali causes the production of soap. It is thus, we inquire, by the method of agreement into the effect of a given cause.
So I thought looking over different circumstances. Okay, well, we're just looking
Tried
for,
under several varieties of circumstances.
and we're looking for ones that it does successfully become soap. Whereas if
Because
the method of,
conceivably there are definitely circumstances in which that will, we can create circumstances in which that will not happen. It's not like it's going to happen under any circumstance.
yeah.
Okay.
In a similar manner, we may inquire into the cause of a given effect. Let lowercase a be the effect. Here, as shown in the last chapter, we have only the resource of observation without experiment. We cannot take a phenomenon of which we do not know the origin and try to find its mode of production by producing it. If we succeeded in such a random trial, it can only be by accident. But if we can observe lowercase a in two different, I'm just going to say effect A in two different combinations, effects A, B, C, and A, D, and E, if we know or can discover that the antecedent circumstances in these cases respectively were causes A, B, C, and A, D, and E, we may conclude by reasoning similar to that in the preceding example that cause A is the antecedent connected with the consequent effect A by a law of causation. Causes B and C, we may say, cannot be causes of effect A, since on its second occurrence they were not present, nor are causes D and E, for they were not present on its first occurrence. Cause A, alone of the five circumstances, was found among the antecedents of effect A in both instances. For example,
okay.
Yeah, I guess for example, let the effect A be a crystallization. We compare instances in which bodies are known to assume crystalline structure, but which have no other point of agreement. We find them to have one, and as far as we can observe, only one antecedent in common. The deposition of a solid matter from a liquid state, either a state of fusion or of solution. We conclude, therefore, that the solidification of a substance from a liquid state is an invariable antecedent of its crystallization. Should we just keep going? Do you have any comments?
I'm wondering if that's even true. Right. We couldn't be sure. And I wonder if that's even true. It might have been true as far as they knew. Maybe it's true. All right. In this example, we may go further and say it is not only the invariable antecedent, but the cause, or at least the proximate event which completes the cause. For in this case, we are able, after detecting the antecedent cause A, to produce it artificially, and by finding that effect A follows it, verify the result of our induction experimentation. The importance of thus reversing the proof was strikingly manifested when, by keeping a vial of water charged with siliceous particles undisturbed for years, a chemist, I believe Dr. Wollaston, succeeded in obtaining crystals of quartz. And in the equally interesting experiment in which Sir James Hall produced artificial marble by the cooling of its materials from fusion under immense pressure, two admirable examples of the light which may be thrown upon the most secret processes of nature by well-contrived interrogation of her. Oh no, interrogation.
More interrogation.
I guess it's all right. I just have to give up my battle against interrogation. It's not just a postmodern thing. It's been there. It's been there all along.
All right. So
Bacon used that word as well. But yeah,
this whole thing, looking at these two paragraphs, it was supposed to be about we have an effect and we don't know where it came from. So we just look at all the different conditions in which crystals are formed, and only the solidification of a substance from a liquid state is something that happens before crystallization. That's the only thing we find in common among all of them. So we're still, I guess, in the first So to answer my very first question, right, the method of agreement, the method of differentiation, and the looking at the cause and the looking at effect are two separate distinctions, right? Because here we're still doing the method of agreement, but we're looking at the effect first. So we've now had two examples of the method of agreement.
Right.
And that's all that I would expect people to get out of this so far.
All right. But if we cannot artificially produce the phenomenon of cause A,
What?
okay, right.
Why would cause? Oh,
because we're going to make, as
right.
experimenters, we make the cause. Yeah.
Yeah, because right, the example that you just gave was the a liquid congealing into a solid, and we might always see that before crystallization, but we don't know still even how to make that happen. Right. So finding a correlation.
So if we can't do that, okay, the conclusion that is the cause of effect A remains subject to very considerable doubt. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we can't repeat that experiment, though an invariable, it may not be the unconditional antecedent of A, effect A, but may precede it as day precedes night or night day.
Correlation.
Yep. This uncertainty arises from the impossibility of assuring ourselves that cause A is the only immediate antecedent common to both instances. If we could be certain of having ascertained all the invariable antecedents, we might be sure that the unconditional invariable antecedent or cause must be found somewhere among them. Unfortunately, it is hardly ever possible to ascertain all the antecedents unless the phenomenon is one which we can produce artificially. Even then, right, it's hard to control the variables is about what he's about to say.
Yep.
Even then, the difficulty is merely lightened, not removed. Men knew how to raise water in pumps long before they adverted to what was really the operating circumstance in the means they employed, namely the pressure of the atmosphere on the open surface of the water. Do you get that? Listeners get that? Basically, when you pump something up and you create a vacuum that pulls it up through a tube, you're just relying on the pressure of the atmosphere. The pressure pushes the water down from the top and then pushes it up through the tube. That's what's really happening, because the vacuum just means there's a differential pressure where the tube is, and there's an imbalance. So it's the atmosphere pushing the water down and then up. Anyway.
Can I tell you, I was wondering recently, I think maybe I was watching something on TV, but when the power goes off, I'm wondering, well, why does the plumbing still work? Because it's a much older technology. But
exactly. That's basically my level of well, we learned about this at St. John's. Is the only reason I know about what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't know that it was the pressure of the atmosphere pushing down on the surface of the water that allowed them to pump things. It is, however, much easier to analyze completely a set of arrangements made by ourselves than the whole complex mass of the agencies which nature determines to be exerting at the moment of the production of a given phenomenon. Okay. We may overlook some of the material circumstances in an experiment with an electrical machine, but we shall, at the worst, be better acquainted with them than those of a thunderstorm. Right? So yeah, we can do better at controlling all the antecedents, all the variables, causal variables in an experiment than we can do just observing something in nature. There could be lots of confounding variables if we're just looking at something happen like a thunderstorm.
The mode of discovering and proving laws of nature, which we have now examined, proceeds in the following axiom. Whatever circumstances can be excluded without prejudice to the phenomenon, or can be absent notwithstanding its presence, is not connected with it in the way of causation. The causal circumstances being thus eliminated, if only one remains, that one is the cause which we are in search of. If more than one, they either are or contain among them the cause, and so, mutatis mutandis, of the effect. As this method proceeds by comparing different instances to ascertain in what they agree, I have termed it the method of agreement, and we may adopt as its regulating principle the following canon. Okay, and then I think this is why we're reading this, is because of these canons, that this is something famous that came out of here.
If first canon, if two or more instances of the phenomenon under investigation have only one circumstance in common, the circumstance in which alone all the instances agree is the cause or effect of the given phenomenon. Quitting for the present. Okay, this is a transition to the next section, but quitting for the present the method of agreement, to which we shall almost immediately return, we proceed to a still more potent instrument of the investigation of nature, the method of difference. All right, the first canon
just restates what was in the previous paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
Okay.
if multiple instances of the phenomenon have only one circumstance in common, that's its cause or effect.
Or effect.
It is connected in some way by a cause and effect relation. Okay. I guess section 2. In the method of agreement, we endeavored to obtain instances which agreed in the given circumstance but differed in every other. In the present method, we require, on the contrary, two instances resembling one another in every respect, but differing in the presence or absence of the phenomenon we wish to study. If our object be to discover the effects of an agent cause A, we must procure cause A in some set of ascertained circumstances as causes A, B, and C, and having noticed the effects produced, compare them with the effect of the remaining circumstances, causes B and C, when cause A is absent. If the effect of causes A, B, and C is effects A, B, and C, and the effect of causes B and C is effect B and C, it is evident that the effect of cause A is effect A. So again, if we begin at the other end and desire to investigate the cause of an effect A, we must select an instance, as in effects A, B, and C, in which the effect occurs, and in which the antecedents were causes A, B, and C, and we must look out for another instance in which the remaining circumstances, effects B and C, occur without effect A. If the antecedents in that instance are causes B and C, we know that the cause of effect A must be cause A, either cause A alone or cause A in conjunction with some of the other circumstances present. Seems like we're just kind of stating what we stated, just a very slight variation what we had before.
Yeah. It's like the contrapositive or something. I don't know. It looks like logic, right? We do go the other way, but
yeah.
It is scarcely necessary to give examples of a logical process to which we owe almost all the inductive conclusions we draw in daily life. Oh, God. Please give us some examples. When a man is shot through the heart, it is by this method we know that it was the gunshot which killed him. I was imagining an arrow. That's so funny. For he was in the fullness of life immediately before, all circumstances being the same, except the wound. The axioms implied in this method are evidently the following. Whatever antecedent cannot be excluded without preventing the phenomenon is the cause or condition of that phenomenon. Whatever consequent can be excluded with no other difference in the antecedents than the absence of a particular one is the effect of that one. Instead of comparing different instances of a phenomenon to discover in what they agree, this method compares an instance of its occurrence with an instance of its non-occurrence to discover in what they differ. The canon, which is the regulating principle of the method of difference, shall be expressed as follows.
Yeah, go ahead and read it. Second
canon. If an instance in which the phenomenon under investigation occurs and an instance in which it does not occur have every circumstance in common save one, that one occurring only in the former, the circumstance in which alone the two instances differ, is the effect, or the cause, or an indispensable part of the cause of the phenomenon. Yeah, this is super boring.
I mean, we had an exciting example there. These two men look exactly alike, but this one has a bullet through the heart, and he died. I think I conclude that it was the bullet wound that killed him. All right, but he had a pre-existing condition. He had a susceptibility to bullets.
Mm-hmm. And one of them was named John, and one of them was named Jack. So how do you?
Yeah,
account for
maybe
that.
it's all bulleted Johns. We'll just have to repeat the experiment and shoot Jack as well.
Yeah. We'll have to shoot everyone ultimately. Um, or at least every type of name.
Section 3, we're now to page 281. The two methods which we have now stated have many features of resemblance, but there are also many distinctions between them. Both are methods of elimination. This term, employed in the theory of equations to denote the process by which one after another of the elements of a question is excluded, and the solution made to depend on the relation between the remaining elements only, is well suited to express the operation analogous to this, which has been understood since the time of Bacon to be the foundation of experimental inquiry, namely the successive exclusion of the various circumstances which are to be found to accompany a phenomenon of a given instance, in order to ascertain what are those among them which can be absent consistently with the existence of the phenomenon. The method of agreement stands on the ground that whatever can be eliminated is not connected with the phenomenon by any law. The method of difference has for its foundation that whatever cannot be eliminated is connected with the phenomenon by a law. Of these methods, that of difference is more particularly a method of artificial experiment, while that of agreement is more especially the resource employed where experimentation is impossible. A few reflections will prove the fact and point out the reason for it.
All right.
Any thoughts so far here?
No. It is inherent in the peculiar character of the method of difference that the nature of the combinations which it requires is much more strictly defined than in the method of agreement. The two instances which are to be compared with one another must be exactly similar in all circumstances except the one which we are attempting to investigate. They must be in the relation of cause ABC and cause BC, or of effect ABC and effect BC. It is true that the similarity of circumstances needs not extend to such as are already known to be immaterial as to the result. And in the case of most phenomena, we learn at once from the commonest experience that most of the coexistent phenomena of the universe may be either present or absent without affecting the given phenomenon. Or, if present, like the name Jack, or if present, are present indifferently when the phenomenon does not happen and when it does. Still, even limiting the identity which is required between the two instances of cause ABC and cause BC to such circumstances as are not already known to be indifferent, it is very seldom that nature affords two instances of which we can be assured that they stand in this precise relation to one another. In the spontaneous operations of nature, there is generally such complication and such obscurity. They are mostly either on so overwhelmingly large or on so inaccessibly minute a scale. We are so ignorant of a great part of the facts which really take place, and even those of which we are not ignorant are so multitudinous, and therefore so seldom exactly alike in any two cases, that a spontaneous experiment of the kind required by the method of difference is commonly not to be found. When, on the contrary, we obtain a phenomenon by artificial experiment, a pair of instances such as the method requires is obtained almost as a matter of course, provided the process does not last a long time. Yeah, it seems like it'll be easier in some circumstances than others.
Mm-hmm.
A certain state of surrounding circumstances existed before we commenced the experiment. This is causes B and C. We then introduce cause A. Say, for instance, by merely bringing in an object from another part of the room before there has been time for any change in the other elements. It is, in short, as Monsieur Comte observes,
Yep.
the very nature of an experiment to introduce into the pre-existing state of circumstances a change particularly definite.
Perfectly definite. Yep.
Perfectly definite. Okay. We choose a previous state of things with which we are well acquainted, so that no unforeseen alteration in that state is likely to pass unobserved. And into this, we introduce as rapidly as possible the phenomenon which we wish to study, so that in general we are entitled to feel complete assurance that the pre-existing state and the state which we have produced differ in nothing except the presence or absence of that phenomenon. If a bird is taken from a cage and instantly plunged into a carbonic acid gas, what? The experimentalist may be fully assured, at all events after one or two repetitions, oh no, poor birds, that no circumstance capable of causing suffocation had supervened in the interim, except the change from the immersion in the atmosphere to immersion in carbonic gas. There is one doubt, indeed, which may remain in some cases of this description. The effect may have been reproduced not by the change, but by the means employed to produce the change. The possibility, however, like strangling the bird on the way to the because you're holding its neck too tightly.
Sure.
The possibility, however, of this last supposition generally admits of being conclusively tested by other experiments. It thus appears that in the study of the various kinds of phenomenon which we can, by our voluntary agency, modify or control, we can, in general, satisfy the requisitions of the method of difference, but that by the spontaneous operations of nature, those requisitions are seldom fulfilled.
I guess backing up a little bit, well, of course, we hadn't really thought of these terms, but clearly some science is done just by observing natural phenomenon, and some is done necessarily, right? If you're studying tornadoes, well, unless you're those plucky scientists in Twister that like think they can go in and start a tornado or whatever by releasing chemicals into the air or
oh, is that what happens?
They go and mess around with stuff.
Okay, that's interesting.
But yeah, normally you just have to look at the various circumstances in which they happen. So he's saying that's the method of agreement when you can't actually do an experiment, you're doing archaeology, whatever. Right. Whenever we're just looking for correlations between, sediment at this layer of the geological with other certain elements. Like we never see, tools made by people before we see this kind of vegetation or whatever. So we're looking for those kind of connections, versus the method of difference where we're looking to do the same thing, but slightly different to like see if the effect actually happens. If I drop the thing, will it always fall? Or if I introduce a vacuum, does that change? Does it change the speed at which it falls, etc.? Yeah, and I guess he's just talking about methodological issues, like you were talking about when you're doing the experiment. All right, the reverse of this is the case with the method of agreement. We do not here require instances of so special and determinate a kind. Any instances whatever in which nature presents us with a phenomenon may be examined for the purposes of this method. And if all such instances agree in any given anything, a conclusion of considerable value is already obtained. We can seldom, indeed, be sure that the one point of agreement is the only one, but this ignorance does not, as in the method of difference, vitiate the conclusion. The certainty of the result, as far as it goes, is not affected. We have ascertained one invaluable antecedent or consequent.
Invariable.
Yes, one invariable antecedent or consequent, however many other invariable antecedents or consequents may still remain unascertained. If causes A, B, and C, A, D, and E, A, F, and G are all equally followed by A, then by effect A, then effect A is an invariable consequence of cause A. If effects A, B, C, A, D, E, A, F, G all number cause A among their antecedents, then cause A is connected as an antecedent by some invariable law with effect A. But to determine whether this invariable antecedent is a cause, or this invariable consequent an effect, we must be able, in addition, to produce the one by means of the other, or at least to attain that which alone constitutes our assurance of having produced anything, namely an instance in which the effect A has come into existence with no other change in the pre-existing circumstance than the addition of cause A. And this, if we can do it, is an application of the method of difference, not of the method of agreement.
It thus appears to be by the method of difference alone that we can ever, in the way of direct experience, arrive with certainty at causes. The method of agreement leads only to laws of phenomena, as some writers call them, but improperly, since laws of causation are also laws of phenomena. That is, to uniformities, correlation, I guess, which either are not laws of causation or in which the question of causation must, for the present, remain undecided.
Right. No matter how many times we just observe, that the tornadoes produce this effect, or that these archaeological or geological commonalities, these apparent laws of phenomenon, we never know if these are really just correlations or if they're actual causations, because we can't control the variables.
Mm-hmm. The method of agreement is chiefly to be resorted to as a means of suggesting applications of the method of difference. As in the last example, the comparison of causes ABC, ADE, AFG suggested that cause A was the antecedent on which to try the experiment whether it could produce effect A, or as an inferior resource in the case of the method of difference, in case the method of difference is impracticable, which, as we before showed, generally arises from the impossibility of artificially producing the phenomena. And hence it is that the method of agreement, though applicable in principle to either case, is more emphatically the method of investigation on those subjects where artificial experimentation is impossible. Because on those it is generally our only resource of a directly inductive nature, while in the phenomena which we can produce at pleasure, the method of difference generally affords a more efficacious process, which will ascertain causes as well as mere laws.
Right. When we're
there's a
trying
lot of, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, there's a lot of statistical investigation through statistical analysis these days where, it is, where I think it's quite common not to have trouble distinguishing correlation and causation. Not that I can give a good example off the top of my head, but
right. Well, even if you find that something is 100% correlated, you still don't know if it is a cause or not, unless you can
like an
around with it.
epidemiological investigation where you try to see, you look at the health effects, the health of a certain community with respect to what's in its water. I mean, and it's not good because there's, I don't know, mercury or whatever, but it also turns out they were eating a lot of McDonald's cheeseburgers. Didn't control for that variable. So in a lot of these, there is a lot of science done today where it's just impossible to control, to do experiments. You're really stuck with observations, and you're getting very, very suggestive results. Saturated fat causes obesity. No, not the case. Right? The whole thing with diet is a really good example, actually. Saturated fat is fine now, or it's not as bad as once thought. Or in the 80s, right, all the rage was a low fat diet was all the rage, which turned out to be, as a weight loss method, which turned out to be almost entirely irrelevant how much fat you get in your diet to whether you're obese, almost entirely. But that was the thing that scientists thought they had discovered. So anyway,
I saw the thing that said you are what you eat, and then I thought that this looks like fatty, and it'll make me fatty.
Exactly. It's quite primitive. Section 4.
Yeah. Go ahead. Or no, I was reading. It's okay. Section 4. There are, however, many cases in which, through our power of producing the phenomenon is complete, the method of difference either cannot be made available at all, or not without a previous employment of the method of agreement. This occurs when the agency by which we can produce the phenomenon is not that of one single antecedent, but a combination of antecedents, which we have no power of separating from each other and exhibiting apart. For example, suppose the subject of inquiry to be the cause of the double refraction of light. We can produce this phenomenon at pleasure by employing any one of the many substances which are known to reflect light in that particular manner. But if taking one of those substances, as Iceland spar, for example, we wish to determine on which of the properties of Iceland spar this remarkable phenomenon depends, we can make no use for that purpose of the method of difference, for we cannot find another substance precisely resembling Iceland spar except in some one property. The only mode, therefore, of prosecuting this inquiry is that afforded by the method of agreement, by which, in fact, through a combination of all the known substances,
Comparison.
well, yes, through a comparison of all the known substances which have the property of doubly refracting light, it was ascertained that they agree in the circumstance of being crystalline substances. And though the converse does not hold, though all crystalline substances have not the property of double refraction, it was concluded with reason that there is a real connection between these two properties, that either crystalline structure or the cause which gives rise to that structure is one of the conditions of double refraction. So we're getting a little more complicated here, sure.
Out of this employment of the method of agreement arises a peculiar modification of that method, which is sometimes of great avail in the investigation of nature. In cases similar to the above, in which it is not possible to obtain the precise pair of instances which our second canon requires, instances agreeing in every antecedent except cause A, or in every consequent except effect A, we may yet be able, by a double employment of the method of agreement, to discover in what instances which contain cause A or effect A differ from those which do not. Ooh, a double employment. Double trouble.
If we compare various instances in which effect A occurs and find that they all have in common the circumstance cause A, and as far as can be observed, no other circumstance, the method of agreement so far bears testimony to a connection between cause A and effect A. In order to convert this evidence of connection into proof of causation by the direct method of difference, we ought to be able in some one of these instances, as for example, cause A, B, and C, to leave out cause A and observe whether by doing so, effect A is prevented. Now, supposing, what is often the case, that we are not able to try this decisive experiment, yet provided we can by any means discover what would be its result if we could try it, the advantage will be the same. Suppose, then, that as we previously examined a variety of instances in which effect A occurred, and found them to agree in containing cause A, so now we observe a variety in which instances in which cause effect A does not occur, and find them agree in not containing cause A, which establishes by the method of agreement the same connection between the absence of cause A and the absence of effect A, which was before established between their presence. As then, it had been shown that whenever cause A is present, effect A is present, so it being now shown that when cause A is taken away, effect A is removed along with it, we have by the one proposition causes A, B, and C, effects A, B, and C. By the other, cause B and C, effects B and C, the positive and negative instances which the method of difference requires.
So instead of experimentally producing a situation in which we subtract, we just look for the subtraction. We look, is that right? We look for circumstances in nature in which there's a subtraction and find the absence of the effect along with it.
So we look at people who are exactly like the guy who got shot in the heart, but who are not shot in the heart. And we say, are they alive?
They have the same name. That's very important.
Are they alive? And if we see, yes, they are alive, then we say, oh, okay, then it must have been that pesky bullet.
Ripping through the flesh, which also might have been a clue.
I mean, I think we might find a lot of people who are not alive, but I guess, it depends what you consider to be exactly like this person. Is it include the name? What are the relevant, it seems like we have to have some background assumptions.
In the case of the bullet, we have a mechanism. And to the extent that we understand a mechanism, I think we're much more confident of causation. So we can say, yes, the bullet penetrated the flesh and caused this damage. And the body relies on having a beating heart. And the bullet goes through it. All that stuff. So we're not really limited to these correlations, and then
Right.
having to do these tricks to see, whether we can make the correlations go away or whatever. So, um, uh, so yeah, I mean, I imagine it's probably something he gets into eventually. The concept of mechanism here, but yeah,
So I guess we got to try to make this a little philosophical before we finish up this part. Um, right? If you think that induction clearly works, but the question is it a sort of intuitive operation? Can it actually be investigated with any kind of rigor? Um, because if it's just a matter of like the total situation is going to produce a given effect, and there's lots of background information that we have, much of which we can't even articulate, then it's going to be very difficult to say exactly what conditions. Like it just seems when we are setting up an experiment, we know what are the variables we have to control for, and what are the variables that we're just going to take for granted, right? My initial one was like, well, let's try this on the moon. Let's try this in a vacuum. And in most cases, those are probably not going to be available things and particularly relevant thing, right? Are we going to see if the guy who got shot would still suffer the same fate on the moon or in a vacuum? Like we say we're using common sense. So I guess that's the question. If we use so much common sense, then do we need, or does a formal logic of induction actually help us, right? Or is constructing these experiments, it involves some general principles like, yeah, we want to isolate the variables and try to clearly see a connection, a core, as tight a correlation as possible. But actually, we're never going to necessarily, yeah, what would enable us to get from correlation to cause? It seems like it's some intuitive knowledge of how the world works. It can't just be add this one element, remove this one element, because even these canons have said, well, all you've established is that they are connected in a cause and effect manner. We don't even know if we just see the two things together, which one is the cause and which one is the effect. It seems like we have to use common sense or something for that.
yeah. Um, and like I said, mechanism and even an awareness of natural kinds, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so as I've said before, we don't we don't get to the idea of a swan by seeing a bunch of similarities between particulars. I don't think that's true. I think, right, a child, if a dog walked up to a young child and it was the first dog it ever saw, and then you pointed to it and said dog, it would point to it and say dog, and it would understand that this is a type of thing without ever seen, having seen any other type of thing. It would, right. And so if the dog is black and the child initially thinks inductively, okay, all dogs are black, that's just according to Kripke, right? That's a fixing mechanism. That's a stereotyping mechanism that doesn't really matter. It's just, right. The point is that there is something there that's essential. Um, if the next dog that walks in is white, it's not going to throw the child for a loop. They're going to take that into account and say, okay, that's not a good fixing mechanism, the black color. But do you see what I'm saying? So I'm
Yeah.
like, if you're a Kripkean essentialist here, I think it changes your views on this a bit, because if you can identify natural kinds at a glance, almost as a kind of gestalt, then you have much more. This is like what you're saying with common sense. You have much more to go on, so to speak. It's not just correlations between. Yeah, it's not just all correlation. You have entities which are tightly knit little unities, and that's your starting point. And that's a big starting point.
So I guess I would recommend that before we decide whether we're going to do a second part on this, we maybe read the Stanford Encyclopedia article or something, determine like, what did Mill actually add to this? You know, what are these canons? Are these really the big deal that I thought they were? Is it worth our time to go through them? I see, you know, it would probably take us 3 sessions to get through the 7 or whatever canons here. If people are bored to tears by this, perhaps this is not
I think
the
it might
best
be
way to do
a
this.
bit too boring, but we can look and see.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe there's a section which is not as boring. I don't know. But yeah, let's think about it.
All right. Well, thanks for trying out. You didn't know John Stuart Mill read like this, did you? You didn't know he wrote stuff like this. Maybe you did, but I didn't know that he wrote stuff like this. And yeah, 674 pages of this. Do you want to? I can see devoting my significant period of time to like, I'm going to read through all of Hegel's phenomenology. I'm going to read through all of the logic. I'm going to read through all of Heidegger, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology perception. But this book, you think anybody has?
Can you imagine writing it, especially with Mill's talents? You know, to sit down and be writing ABC and thinking, you know, I could write another like page turner, like on Liberty. Why am I doing this? That's what would be constantly on my mind. I would
Maybe
just
it
be
was
in such a state of self-doubt, you know, like, okay, I'm formalizing all of this things that people do intuitively as scientists to do. Is it necessary? I'd be plagued with self-doubt. Not him. He can just get through 674 pages, and he probably did it really quickly.
Well, I imagine, yes, we should see if we can figure out some background information about this, but I could imagine like if he had to teach a logic course repeatedly, then he might just, you know, come up with, well, actually, I think I could improve some of these things. I think I could give a better summary formulation. I think if you had to teach the same course 5 times in a row or something, and you were a person of his talent, then you might just be like, move over. I think I can just write a better textbook than we've been using so far. Might as well. I'll cash in on the huge demand for logic textbooks. All right. Thanks for hanging out. See you, everybody.
Bye.